Excellent. So let me know when you are we recording now?
I push the button.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. This is very cool. I think I've attended a couple of this before, and I like the format that is more relaxed, right? Don't think of it as a presentation. In fact, I saw Perry's here, Chaz is here, and these are people who I've learned from. Some of the things that you'll see today are things that I've learned from them. So what I would like to propose is that as I go through some of the material and some of the demos, that people pitch in and ask questions and just make it a conversation. Right? This is not a lecture in any way. This is just some of the things that we do here at Mediacurrent. We use some of these techniques as part of our training and our day-to-day Drupal development or theming work. So I would love it if you guys, anyone involved, could just throw in their ideas, comments. This is, after all, a way for all of us to learn, right? So this is not a way for me to teach and you learn. It goes both ways. So always looking for new ways, new techniques of doing things. So best practices for integrating components with Drupal. And although most of the work that we've done is with Drupal 8, given that we are pretty much going to be working with the same technologies in Drupal 9, a lot of this, if not all of it, will apply to Drupal 9. So I know I've done a little bit of components with Drupal 9, and so far, I really don't see any difference as of yet. So we are going to be talking about rethinking your markup. A lot goes into this step in making sure that you are building something that will have a long life, right, in your project. Something that will not only allow you to make use of it, but be able to reuse it, be able to ensure that it is responsive, accessible, good user experience, and a lot of other things. We'll talk about building the components. A lot of the things that I typically, or our team typically goes through when building components. There may be times when people say, well, you just write the markup and just style it, but there's a lot more that goes into that. And so we'll talk about some of the thinking behind that process. One of those things that we think about when we're building components, even though we may be doing it in Pattern Nav or some other design system, is think about Drupal. How is Drupal going to do this one thing for me when it's time to move this component or integrate this component with Drupal? What are some of the Drupal things that I need as I build this component so that my component is able to seamlessly adapt to the Drupal environment? So we'll go over some of those best practices and things to consider when building components. And then we'll go into the integration process. And if there are questions, you can ask those. But as I said before, please feel free to interrupt me at any time. Or just to throw in something that you think might be of value for others to hear, as I talk about a specific topic. So that's perfectly okay. So we are Mediacurrent, and we are a bunch of people, right? We are always trying to find a way to make things better for our clients, our community. We certainly have a big commitment to our community. We like to always contribute to the community. In many ways, not just code, but this talk is an example. Content we write, free training that we provide, and other things. So we love the community, and so that's who we are. That's our mission, really. So I'm the head of learning. I've been working with Drupal for over 10 years, primarily as a front-end developer, and I've been doing quite a bit of training for a while. Actually, Bad Camp is a camp that I've been doing training for, I would say 5-6 years maybe, and love it. It's probably one of my favorite camps of all. And Marky and I host, never mind, Marky doesn't, I do still host the Mediacurrent Open Waters podcast. Marky used to do it with me, but somehow he said he doesn't want to do it anymore, so we'll see.
For some reason. I don't know.
For some reason. And so we haven't done a episode lately, but we are planning on doing some more. So rethinking your markup. So has anybody encountered something like this before? We're working on a Drupal site. I'm sure just about all of us have. This is actually a code from a project that I worked on, and if you look at this, the only thing being actually printed on the page is one link for an Instagram social media. And here we have a river of divs. So the reason I show this is because there are, a lot of people who work with this kind of markup, right? Or that they may not give it the priority that it may need to improve it. But there's a lot of things that obviously can make this a bad situation, right? There's no semantic, there's really no meaning here. It doesn't tell you exactly what this kind of content it is. There is no patterns as far as, classes that you use for CSS. Is there a need for all these divs? Probably not. So there's a lot more, right? So when you think about writing something that may be a little bit more cleaner, right? More appealing, right? So here's an example, the world's most famous example, or a card, right? Where you are breaking things down into pieces, right? Into sections, and you are associating not just markup, right? From an HTML point of view, but also CSS by using BEM. You can see that there is some kind of association between elements. You can tell very quickly what belongs where. Even if you're looking at this and inspecting the browser, for example, on a web page, you can very easily tell where things are, what do things belong to, right? We can see that everything is prefixed by card. And so some people may see this as, okay, so we see HTML here, we see parts of things that we will do with CSS, things that we will do with JavaScript, for example, a button that is there to collapse and expand a card, that can be triggered by a quick JavaScript function. But there's a lot more here that goes into building something like this, right? There is a lot more things like responsive design. When you're writing markup, right? If you have the luxury of having your design comps in front of you for the project that you're working on, you want to know what this card is going to look like, or how it's going to behave when it's on mobile, when it's on tablet, when it's on desktop, or even larger devices, right? So the markup that you write should be such that your component will work on all of those scenarios, right? So as I said before, it's not just a matter of writing, HTML tags. It's about how is this markup going to be able to adjust naturally to the devices, to the different viewports. There are ways, obviously, in which we can adjust markup through either JavaScript or CSS. Obviously, that would not be recommended. You want for markup to naturally adjust itself based on the available space in your page. And that's the goal here. But in addition to that, user experience, right? Because if you're forcing elements of your page, through CSS or JavaScript, then you are really jeopardizing what the user experience will be. You don't want to do that. You want things to naturally take place, to naturally fall into place. And that provides you, as a result, a good user experience. Performance, right? We saw the previous screen where we have all those divs, and that is just one little, as I said before, that was one link, right? So imagine what a full page will look like. And so that can potentially jeopardize performance for your website. And accessibility, right? If we were to not even apply any styles to this card here, I can almost guarantee that this will still be a component that will be able to be understood by assistive technologies, or by somebody who just reading a page, maybe they have visual impairments or are not very able to see very clearly. So accessibility plays a big part on how your markup is written, right? It makes a big difference, what to use the right tags for your markup, right? If you want something that you're gonna click on, you can make a div or any other element look like a button, but it's better to use a button because that gives you a lot of extra functionality that a div does not do out of the box. Visually hidden, you see that class there. It simply means that, yes, this is a label that we could, we don't need to see, right? We have an icon here. Technically, this will be an icon that will be shown. So the label we don't need to see. However, we want to make it available so for assistant technologists to look at and see that, so that I can give a little more context. SEO, right? Good markup is good for SEO. And so there is a lot that goes into that. I know search engines, will look at that. They will make sure that your content is structured in such a way that it makes sense, that is got a hierarchy that makes sense. And that is, so usability, how easy is this going to be for you to use on a page, right? So think about all of these things just from this one little example. Are all of these things are involved into that. So there is more, and this goes back to one of the things that I see a lot is, some people just don't give HTML and CSS enough credit, but there is so much that goes into this. It's not just the syntax part of it, but it's the thinking process, right? How to properly adjust markup. And I'm not saying this is perfect markup, by the way. I'm sure some of you may find things here that you can improve, and I can improve, and that's okay. But I think it's certainly an effort, right, that we can try to get to a better place so that our markup is a little more easier to understand by everything else. Reusability is big when it comes to components. Being able to create this one thing once and be able to use it anywhere on our site as many times as we like is huge. So yeah, best practices all the way. So building the component, we're going to build something similar to that card. And as I said before, some of the best practices will be BEM. If you don't know what BEM is, BEM stands for Block Element Modifier, which is a terminology and a technique for naming your CSS classes in a way that provides context, provide relationships between elements. And that will make things easier for you, especially when it comes to debugging code or in order to understand how things relate to each other. One of the big things that we do when we build components is, as I said before, think about Drupal as you're building your components. Some of the things that Drupal makes use of are attributes, title prefix, title suffix. So how do you build components in a way that will allow for this type of elements that Drupal sometimes counts on or provides to be available on your components? Includes and embeds are big as you nest components into other components. Twig blocks are a really great way to be able to alter your content on a component or a page before it gets rendered into Drupal. And we'll go over into that. View modes are huge. I like to use view modes for just about anything, whether it's content types, paragraph types, media, right? For images and things. It's a great way to use view modes. Views, if you create views using view modes, it really can improve the way you do your theming. So we're gonna think about in Drupal terms when we're building something in Pattern App. So here's that card that we were looking at in a way, almost. It's a different card, but it's got some of the same elements. And so, variations is a big thing in components, right? Being able to do something and do it in such a way that it will still give you a flexibility for updating it and changing it if you need to. The reason I'm showing this here is because with Drupal and Twig blocks, we can do a lot of things. Rather than building duplicate cards, we can do things with Twig blocks. For example, if you look at the date on the cards, they're not only in different location, but they're also in different format. So this is one of the things that we do in our training is, how do Twig blocks work? That can be a confusing term for some, especially if you're a Drupal person, because you automatically think of Drupal blocks, but they're not related in any way. But here, the example is that we don't want to be printing two different date fields, right? We want to print one date field because Drupal will simply give us one date field. But how do we manage this in a way that based on which card we want to use with our content, let's say our node, we want to print the date in different format in different locations. And Twig blocks will let us do that. And I can show you some of the logic if we have time on how that will be done. Here is an example of reusability, right? Building the card and being able to use it as many times as you like, and in different format, right? For example, here the card doesn't have the date, it doesn't have the tags, but it's still the same card. It's just we are creating different view modes in which we can say, here's how I would like this card to look on this one page. If you think about Amazon, for example, if you're looking at a product, you can see that Amazon, you can look at the product in different ways, in different screens, right? If when you look at it as the main item, You can zoom in, you can see the price and all the description. But if you scroll down or if you look to the right of that product, you will see similar products, in different format, different ways, with different fields, different kind of data. So those are the way I like to think of view modes, is being able to provide the same product in different ways depending on how you want to present that product on a page. Here is this is an example of a page that we typically build during our training. This is quite a lot. There's quite a lot going on here. And so our training is 2 days, right? And we take 2 days to build this full page, but there's a lot that goes here in order to build this kind of thing. So there's a lot of, we use the atomic design terminology, right? Of methodology for starting with the smallest element possible and moving into larger ones to build a full page. So this is kind of the philosophy that we would take, is building from smallest to larger to be able to build, a full page in this example, right? So it's not time for questions, but it's time for the demo. But before I do, I wanted to see if there are any questions so far about the content that I just covered. If no questions, that's okay. All right, so I have a simple Drupal site here. I just created a couple of nodes. I created a content type called node blog, and added just a couple of nodes. And then I created a view to just display the nodes under the /blog URL. Nothing fancy. As you can see, it's got a date, it's got an image, a little teaser, a few tags, and obviously the title. And so this is kind of what we were looking at for the card, right? Is this will be one of those cards. So this is a blog content type. Each of these is a node of blog type in teaser view mode, right? So meaning that it's only showing a small version of the content. If you click on the title, obviously it takes you to the full screen. Oops, not that one, but yeah, either way. And so, but today we're gonna just build a component and integrate it for just the teaser view. So the card part of the node, right? So we are going to do that. Obviously, there's not enough time to build the entire thing from scratch. But one thing I wanted to point out is if I expand my themes directory in my project under web themes, and my theme name is training theme. The first thing, if you're working with components in Drupal, you need the components module, right? That allows you to create namespaces for being able to reference components or nest components within other Twig templates. So we're using Pattern Lab. We at Mediacurrent, we have our own solution for a Pattern Lab enabled theme. It's called Theme Generator. And we kind of deviate a little bit from the regular or the traditional structure that Pattern Lab provides for your projects. For example, we still use patterns, but inside patterns, we have components. And this is where we create all of our components. Typically, for Pattern Lab, you will see underscore patterns, and then you will see atoms, molecules, organisms, and those things. But we don't use the names themselves, the terminology, but we still use the same methodology as far as breaking things down into small pieces. And that's the overall concept that we follow. So I created a couple of components already just to kind of make things easier. One of those is an eyebrow. A lot of times you have in your project, right? You have the need to have a label on things or category on your thing. And a lot of times those labels or categories are styled the same way. So to me, it makes sense to create an individual, this will be called an atom, right? And here it's just printing a little string of text, no big deal. But notice how here we are attaching a library. And so starting with Drupal 8, the recommended approach for adding CSS and JavaScript to a page or a component in Drupal is to use libraries. Libraries are great because it allows you to use only the libraries that you need when you need them and where you need them, right? So that means you don't have to load the entire CSS code base of your entire project on every single page. And if you wonder, why are you attaching a library on a component? Because this is pattern lab, right? This has absolutely, at this point, this has no concept that this is a Drupal project. Drupal doesn't even know about this particular component. But the reason we are adding this here, this has no effect whatsoever in pattern lab. But when I use this component in Drupal, its library will come with it by default because I am attaching it to it. So every time I include this component on a Drupal template, then this library will automatically come with it. And our approach is that for every component we create a library. Here is the eyebrow library, where we specify that it's a CSS, it's a component level, right? This is from the SMAX methodology, right? The component, this level here determines the order in which your assets are loaded by Drupal, and also how they are, what's the word? Compressed and minified. What is the, forgot the term that Drupal uses to combine all of those similar elements together. At the end, you know, for easier rendering of those assets. And so here we're attaching our CSS style. So we have a workflow, which is a gulp-based workflow that we can run, you know, npm run build or npm run watch, and that compiles our theme. And for every style sheet that we create, for example, if you notice the heading, the eyebrow, we have a style sheet there. So here is a SAS file, but our gulp task will compile this into our dist directory, and it's right here, right? So it will compile into plain CSS. So that is the CSS file that we are making part of our library, right? And we're doing the same for all the other ones. So another example is the heading. This is an interesting one. If you look at the heading, this is my typical preference for writing a heading or title, right? This is a title that you can use on a blog or on an image, anything, right? It could be a plain text, or it could be a link. So the way I like to do this is I like to create an object where I specify, first I specify a heading level. This allows me to change the heading level of this component when I use it. If I want an H1 or H2, H3, right? This makes it possible for me to do that. I like to add a modifier property so that I can pass a CSS class if I need to a specific item. The title or the text of the title will be here. And then a URL, right? So the way this is done in Drupal and Twig is we are completing the age level by passing the heading level variable. And if no value is passed, we're saying a default of 2, meaning that we will at least end up with an H2 if no value is passed, right? Then we're setting a placeholder for modifier. Modifier is that if we're passing a class, we'll be, you know, adding it next to the heading class of this component, right? And then we are saying, okay, if there is a URL passed to this component, then we are going to wrap the title of this heading in an anchor, right? It's going to be a link. Otherwise, it's just going to be plain text, just plain text, right? And so if you look at this here, the idea will be that we will use the title for this here. In this case, we will have a URL, so this will become a link. But when we get to the full node, then the title will just be plain text, right? So that will be the idea there. So, so this is just an approach that we take for that. Some people may even opt to add, you know, attributes or title prefix, title suffix. It's perfectly okay to do that as well. We can talk more about that in just a moment. So I wanted to mention these two components because, and then there's this one here, tags. If you notice on our card, we have tags, right? This tag's here, this one's got 2. So the idea is to build those small things individually so that you can individually address them. If you notice the eyebrow, the heading, and the tag, they're all individually styled, right? We're not styling them as part of the card because we may want to use tags somewhere else and we may want to change the styles of those cards on this other element, right? So we are applying just some base styles, and then they can still be modified as you use them on other components. One of the things that I like about the breaking things down into smaller pieces is that your CSS becomes very flat. There's a lot of advanced things you can do with CSS, especially with Sass. But to me, I like to keep things as simple and as flat as possible because it's easier to maintain. I've worked in projects where there is a endless level of nesting of mixins and functions and Sass that it just becomes a pain to maintain. To me, because we are using BEM and we can see that we have unique CSS classes for each of our elements, we are able to not have to nest things. I didn't even have to nest this one here. I did it just to make it easier, but I could have just pulled this out of here and I think it's got a class of tag link or something to that effect, right? But that makes it for our styles to be very flat. And we'll look at a better example when we get to the card, which is the ultimate component that we're going to be building. If you look at the card, there's very little nesting and very little code, if you notice here, because we're just, we don't have to style the eyebrow. We don't have to style the tags or the title here, right? That's already been styled somewhere else. So this here is mainly just for the structure of the card, the layout of it, and everything else is done separately on their own, which is a nice way to make components not only reusable, but also portable. Because I can grab this card component, this eyebrow component, tags, and the heading components, I can grab them all four and drop it into another project, and I'm done, right? I will just need to create the libraries for each, but that's about it. So that makes them so much more reusable and portable to even among different projects. So again, those are some of the benefits to look at that. So let's go to the card. One of the things that we have here is, again, we're setting up the same type of structure for our fields. We have our date field. Remember how we said we wanted just one single date field. We have our body text, our tags, an image. The thing about the image here is I used to write the image by splitting the URL and the alt text separate as separate elements here, right? As part of the image object. So I would say URL, and I will just put the URL of the image or the source, right? But then I started thinking that it's better to just have the entire image being part of this one single variable here, because when we come to Drupal, I want the entire entity, the image entity, to be provided to me. I don't want to break that down into the source and the alt text of the image. I want the whole thing, because that is going to help me with caching, right? And be able to do more with that image entity rather than just grabbing pieces of it, splitting it into pieces, right? So that's the main idea behind that. And here is where things get a little more interesting. So we talked about before how thinking about Drupal when you are building your components, right? In addition to the markup, it's important to understand, okay, how is Drupal going to do this for me so that when I build my component, it'll be easier for me to integrate it with Drupal. There are things that is best to let Drupal do for us because it's just not worth the extra effort. An example will be forms. I hardly ever create a component for forms because I let Drupal dictate the markup of that form. It's easier for me to deal with Drupal's markup that way than having to build my component and having to change Drupal's markup to match my component. So I do it the other way around. The other example would be menus, right? And so, but those are things that is good. It's important to understand, okay, how is Drupal going to provide this data to me? And we'll get to, when we get to the tags, you see that that's another reason we approach tags the way I did there. But what I'm doing here is I start with obviously an article tag, because if you think about it here, each of these nodes is basically an article, right? It's an article of type blog. So it makes sense to start with an article tag with the class of card, right? And then I'm saying, okay, I'm checking whether there is a modifier being passed in the card, this here. Am I passing a modifier? This becomes really handy when you're trying to create that variation that we show, right? Where we have the vertical card, and then we have the horizontal card, right? We can make a lot of those changes happen by just passing a CSS class to the horizontal class, right? Card. So I'm checking whether we have a modifier, and if we do, then we print it. This space here is simply adding an empty space between card and the next class that will be added there. And this is just concatenating, right, this space with the actual value of the modifier. Then thinking about Drupal, okay, Drupal will have attributes, right? Drupal likes to print attributes on our markup. Sometimes Drupal will rely on those attributes. Sometimes we will use them. Sometimes we don't need them or we don't care, but it's also important to still make them available in your component. So we're saying here, are there attributes? So here's, we're thinking when we put this in Drupal, we're gonna be checking if there are attributes, and if there are, then we're gonna print those attributes, but only the classes, right? The CSS classes, so that they go into the CSS class attribute here, right? And then we'll do another check. And this time we'll say, give me the rest of the attributes like IDs, data attributes, and everything else, but without the classes. So that way it'll print the rest of the attributes, but no classes, because the classes are empty. There are many ways in which this particular logic can be written. This is one that I particularly like, but there are several ways, you know. So if you are used to writing this in another way, it's perfectly okay. There's no wrong way, really. The main goal is to make sure that our component it's got a placeholder for our attributes, so that when we put this in Drupal, Drupal has a place to where inject those attributes on our markup, right? And then we just have some basic conditionals. One thing that I like to do, especially with the card, is we have two types of data, right? When you look at a node, we have a media type of content, and we have text, right? Everything else is text. So, and given the layout of our card, I'm splitting the card into two sections, the media and the rest of the content, right? So if you're wondering why, well, if you remember, when we looked at the horizontal card, all the fields on the card flip to the right of the image, right? So it's easier to flip this entire container, which has all the fields, all the text fields, rather than individually move each of the fields to the right of the image, right? So this allows us for easier manipulation of the layout of the card. And if we just let it fall naturally, the card will be vertically aligned. And if we do just a simple, you know, display flex, we'll switch all of this content to the right of the image. And that makes it very easy to manipulate, easier to move just one container than individual fields. Here's another thing that, again, thinking in Drupal terms, is we are creating placeholders for our title prefix and title suffix. Now, if you don't know what these are or what they're for or how you can use them or why you should care, if you look at here, a good example of title prefix is that modules, contrib modules, or even custom modules can use this to add additional functionality to your page. One very common functionality that is added to those is this links that you see here, this contextual links, right? You can quickly do edit of your content right in line, right? You can do all of that. And that is provided by the title prefix and title suffix. Right. So if we don't make those available in our components, then you won't be able to edit this content in line the way we are doing here. So, so that's the purpose of that here. And now we can see that we're starting to use now an include. This is a tweak statement. And this is a namespace. Remember, we talked about using the components module. That allows you to create namespaces so that rather than specifying a absolute path, right? Something like, I don't know what it will be. Something like, I don't know, source, patterns, you know, anything like that, right? The namespace has already been mapped to our components directory. So that way we have a relative path to our components rather than an absolute path. So this, and where does this namespace come from? Well, typically this namespace, at least for us, and this can vary for your use case, but for us, we like to make this namespace the same name as our theme. So this is our theme name. If you are using Pattern Lab out of the box, these namespaces will be atoms, molecules, organisms, pages, right? That's what the namespaces will be, but the concept is still the same. It's a way for you to be able to quickly link to the components, right? So that here we're including, or we're nesting the heading component into our card. And this here, we're just mapping, right? This part here is the heading object from the heading component. You can see here, this. And the part after the colon is the heading object of the card that we have in our data file here, right here. Now I can call this anything. Let's say I wanted to do this is card title. Let's say that's the name of the object. That's fine. I would just need to change this here to card title. The names don't need to match as long as their properties inside of them match. That's all that matters, right? So the reason I like to use objects and nested properties is that it makes the including of the component easier than if I didn't use objects. As an example, if instead I did something like this, right? If I just put this the root of the JSON object, right? So that means that when I include this component here, I will have to individually map each of those properties with each other here. So that will be about 4 lines, right? The heading level, the URL, everything else one by one. So that's why I prefer to do objects, because then I can just map the parents, the parent object of that element. And because both match the source and the card, then that's all there is to it. This width here, it's not always required. I think this will probably work if I just did this. I'm not gonna try to compile it this way, but it will probably just work like that because they both match, right? The heading and the card, they both match. But I like to do this because sometimes I may want to do something else with it. So the width basically is saying, you know, I want to include this component and I want to pass these properties or these variables to it. Let's say I only want to pass the title text and I don't want the URL, I don't want the heading label or anything else. I can just pass that one item, right? And the only is basically just saying don't, but if I didn't use, if I just wanted to do heading, let's say title with heading title as an example, that means I'm just passing the text of the title to this component, right? But if I don't add only, I will get an error message because Twig is going to say, wait a minute, this component has more than just this one property or variable. It's got URL, it's got heading label, it's got modifier. And so the only kind of allows me to, in a way, say, yeah, I know this component has more than just title as properties, but I just want this one. I don't want them all. So that's what this with and only do for you. All right, so, okay. Oh, okay, I forgot I had done this. I can explain, this is not part of the example, but I want to explain to you what this is, because this is where Twig blocks come in handy. Remember the cards when I show you that one card had the date under the title and the other card had the date on the corner of the card and the dates were different formats. So the way I got to do that using just one single card is I wrote some logic saying if card wide, which is the horizontal class, if that class exists in my modifier that I'm passing to the card, then I'm going to create this wrapper, and inside there, I'm going to create a Twig block, and I'm going to pass the date variable, right? Only if this card wide class exists on the card, meaning that if this class doesn't exist, this whole thing will be ignored. This will never be available. So I'm going to remove that just so I don't break it. And then if you notice down here, I have the date field again, but this time the logic is if the card wide is not on my modifier, right? If it's not available here, if I'm not passing a class, then do another wrapper and give me the date again. And I'm putting that in a Twig block. So you'll see that when I include this on Drupal, I can choose which of the dates I want to print based on the card that I'm integrating with Drupal. For example, if I if I want to include the card wide, when I include this in Drupal, I'm going to pass the card wide class, and Twig will know that that class exists, and it will give me the date up here and not here. So that's a way on how to override that content without having to show and hide. Some people would probably opt to say, I want to show the date, it's just a little field, so I'm going to hide it here and show it here and do the vice versa on the other. Yeah, it's doable, right? But to me, this is a little more flexible. It gives you a lot more control, and you're not printing markup that you don't really need to see on a card. And here are the tags. It's just what we're doing here. First, I'm checking whether there are tags, and I'm putting a block again, a Twig block again. So the way Twig blocks work is I see them as a way to overwrite content and also alter content, or completely delete content from your templates. And you will see those on a lot of the Drupal templates out of the box. They come with Twig blocks, right? And so you'll see this when we integrate this with Drupal, is that if I don't print this tags block in Drupal, then it'll give me whatever is in there. But if I just declare it in Drupal like this, empty, then what I'm saying there is, for this Twig block, I don't want anything in it to be printed when I render this in Drupal, right? I'm eliminating that content. So it's a nice way, again, to make it more flexible. Or I can say, you know what, when I print this block on Drupal, I wanted to add, you know, some text, right? This is a list of tags, right? So now I have the flexibility to not only print the content that I want, but I can even add more to it, right? Even if the original component didn't have that content to begin with. So that's the thing about Twig blocks. So this is kind of the logic that I go through when I build things like this. Again, this is just Pattern Lab. We haven't really touched Drupal just yet, right? So are there any questions before we jump into the Drupal side of things, where we can make this card work in Drupal to show our blog posts? And how am I doing in time, by the way, there, Amy June? I really lost track of how much time I have.
You're good. It's 6:45. You're fine.
Thanks. Any questions on that so far? All right, so no worries. So again, remember how each card, each component has its own library. There are times when a library, for example, the card, there may be times when rather than creating individual libraries for each component, you can actually do, you know, this, right? So that it's saying that the card library will have more than just the card CSS. It will have the eyebrow CSS also, right? That's one way of doing the libraries. The other way will be, you can do dependencies, right? You can do, in my case, it will be, this will be the name of your namespace, and you can say eyebrow. So what this means is that every time I include the card on a component, it will bring this other library with it, right? So it's a nice way to be able to create dependencies for libraries like that. All right, so let's go to Drupal and tags. This is supposed to be tags. I do want to show you the tags because this is going back to what I said before. Okay, how is Drupal going to do this for me? I need to sometimes understand how Drupal is going to do some things so that when I build the components, it'll make my life easier. For tags is an example of that. I looked into tags. I said, how is Drupal printing these tags for me? What kind of templates is Drupal using when it's printing these tags? So these are eventually will be taxonomy, right? Taxonomy terms. So I noticed that Drupal is using 2 or 3 templates for printing tags. One is the individual template, the single item, the single tag itself. So what I did is I created a component just for the individual tag. And I noticed that Drupal uses the name and the URL variables on that template. So I built this with just an anchor, pretty much that's all I could have done here. But I added A list item, because I know that a collection of tags will be inside a UL. I could have done this separately, right? I could have the list item in here instead, but it's fine. But again, I noticed that by looking at the taxonomy term twig template that Drupal comes out of the box with, it had attributes. And so I wanted to make sure that those also become available when my tags are printed in Drupal. And then if you're new to Pattern Nav, notice how the tag item, which is the single tag item, it's got an underscore, just, you know, as starts with an underscore as the name. What that is that Pattern Nav will ignore this individual item from being displayed in Pattern Nav. Because we don't need to see in Pattern Nav an individual tag item, right? Sometimes you may want to, right? If you want to show that to the client, so here's what a single tag looks like. But most likely what we want to see in Pattern Nav is the collection of tags, right? When there's two or more. So that's why the underscore is there. If I go to Pattern Nav, you will notice that there is no tag item, it's only tags, right? And this is what the tags look like. Right. So by putting an underscore in front of this one, this makes it, Pattern Nav ignores it and doesn't show it on your navigation. And so here's the tags. This is the collection of tags. There will be multiple ones, right? So again, we're doing our attributes. And here we're doing a for loop, right? This is how Drupal gives us an array, right, of tags. And, you know, it does a loop. And so we're setting, again, another twig block. And we're saying for each item in the items array, right, which is the equivalent of what Drupal will give us. Then for each of those, print a tag item, print a single item, right? And since I'm putting a UL here, each item that is printed will be printed with an LI, right? Because that's how I build it here. Again, I could have done the LI here and just print the anchor itself. But I think I was trying to separate the twig attributes, these attributes from here, from being here and also being here. So I wanted to instead do that. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at Drupal now. So the first thing, obviously, when we look at Drupal, the first thing I want to do is, okay, let's see, how is this content being rendered? What is Drupal using to render this content, right? And enabling twig debugging is key to be able to see all of our template suggestions, right? So for whatever reason, this is something I don't get, is that when you use the media entity for images, every image is wrapped in an article tag, which I'm not sure if that's semantically correct or not, but that's what it is. So here's the first article. Right, this is this whole first top article, and notice all these attributes here, right? All this, you know, entity ID, data attributes. Those are the things that we were talking about, you know, that we need to account for when we're building our components, so that they still are available when our component is integrated with Drupal. And so we see that we have a node, theme, content, and is the node template, right? Each node, each item is a node. So if we look up here, we see that we have this node template being used by Drupal. Right now, I already made a copy of this in my theme. That's why it's showing my theme. Otherwise, this should be showing my base theme, which would be stable. But if we look up, we say, okay, I need to be able to create a template suggestion for the full article, because right, each article represents a card. So I want to integrate the card with an article. And looking at the different suggestions, there's many options here, but the one that makes the most sense to me will be node of type blog. And I'm using the teaser view mode here, right? And so this one says node blog teaser. So I can actually do that, make a copy of that template. Typically, I would copy the template for this from the stable theme in Drupal core, and then make a copy of that in my theme, right? Templates, in this case, content directory. So here is that template that I have already copied. So what I would do is just make a copy of that. And I'm going to add the template suggestion name, which was blog teaser, right? So notice how it's still the same template, nothing has changed. So technically, let me do this here. Okay. If I clear my cache, there should be no difference. And what I'm seeing here, let me just wait for that cache to be cleared. Okay, I'm going to reload the page. So the page reloaded, and now we can see that Drupal is using our new template now, and you can tell because it's got the X next to it, that tells us that that's the Drupal template being used by Drupal. And so, but everything looks the same, obviously, and that's because we didn't change any code. We just created a copy of it so that the work that we do is more specific, and it only affects this type of nodes, right? That's the only thing we want to do. We don't want to alter anything else on our website. We just want to alter the way these nodes look, right? So one of the things that I typically do, right? Let me hide this for now. Obviously, all of this will change because we want to use our own component rather than all of this here. So what a lot of people will do is just wipe this out, right? And start integrating the component. What I like to do is I like to, maybe get rid of this for sure, but not just yet. But I do always like to keep the comments available because the comments give you a lot of information about what's available in this template so that when you're integrating this component with Drupal, you can make use of those variables. For example, things like we have title attributes, right? We have title prefix, title suffix, right? We have all those things that we know we're gonna need some point. So let me go and start the integration process, and then we can start little by little putting it all together. So I'm going to shoot a little bit because we certainly don't want to see me just type things here. So we identified the template, right? The template suggestion, which is node, blog, teaser. The first thing that I like to do is, one of the things is Drupal, you know that this variable of content, right? This is the entire content array that Drupal has for this node, right? And so a mistake that a lot of people do is that they start splitting this into pieces and poking things out of it, and therefore breaking the content array. And that can lead to problems with caching, for example. So one of the first things we want to do is we want to kind of trigger the full content array to be rendered by Drupal by simply creating a variable here. We're not going to use this variable. We're simply kind of, in a way, trying to keep Drupal awake, saying, hey, there's a content array that we need to make sure that is available on this template. So here's what we're doing for that. This is something that has worked really well for us. The name of the variable can be anything you want. You're not going to be using it. It's just as a trigger for that content array to become available on our template. Then, if you notice, when we build the card component here, we created an object, right, for the heading, for the title of the card. And so when we integrate this with Drupal, we want to make sure that we keep the same format for this, right? So the way I typically do that, there are several ways. Some people will do it inside the include that I'll show you in just a moment. But what I like to do to keep things a lot cleaner in the include is I like to set those variables outside of the include, right? So for example, I'm creating a new variable for the title of the card. And in it, I'm passing the same properties that we used in our JSON object when we build the component, right? The difference here is that I'm assigning the values that I want. I want each card to have an H3, right? I want each card to have a class of card title, right? And notice that for the title or the text of the title, I'm passing the value of label. Where's that coming from? Well, if we look at this template here, is here somewhere. Here it is. right? The label variable in this template is actually the title of the node. So that's why we're mapping that with that. And the same with the URL. The URL is up there too. Right there, right? This is the URL to the node. So because we're working in the teaser view mode, right? We have the template teaser, then we will need the URL, right? Because this is supposed to be a link to the full node. So that's what this variable is for, right? The format here is a little off. Okay, so so I set up that variable for the title. The other thing that we did in our component is, I guess that's as far as the variable that is, but remember how we created a couple of twig blocks in our component. And if I did an include statement to include our component in Drupal, and I will just do, again, our namespace, training theme. This will be card, that twig with, and then all the different fields. But if I do an include, I am not able to make use of any of the twig blocks, which means that data will probably not be available to me in Drupal, right? So the only way I can make use of all the twig blocks that we created is if we use instead an embed statement. So the embed allows you to do everything that an include does, but it allows you to also work with the blocks that we had. And so, so that's what we'll do here. And so we're gonna go step by step on each of the areas that we need to do for the embed. The first thing I like to do is, since we created placeholders for attributes, for title prefix and title suffix, right? These are the attributes from the component. This is from the component, right? This is from the component. And these on the right are the things that are available in this template here. So if we look up here, all of those are available. Wow, this looks bad. All of those are available here, right? We have attribute here somewhere. Here it is. We have title prefix, as we saw earlier, title suffix somewhere on here, right? So we're just simply mapping that. Since we already have placeholders for this in our component, Drupal will know exactly where to inject this, right? When the page is rendered in Drupal. Next, we're gonna map the fields themselves. And the next field will be the title, okay? So let's add the title to map it to with Drupal data, right? We want the title from the component to now be use Drupal data. So this will be a heading from the component. And remember how we created this variable here? So this is what we will use here. Right now, as I said before, I could have done something like this instead. I would say, as an example, title. I would say label. Right? I'll say URL. Say URL. Modifier. Card. Title. But this just, it makes this a lot more look more complex than it really is. So I'd rather take care of all that here, so that when it's time to integrate it with Drupal, I just pass one single line of code, and that brings everything with it, right? The next thing, I'm gonna copy a couple of these things here just to make things a little bit easier. The image, right? This is the image from our Drupal component, and now we are grabbing the full image entity. This is the image field in our blog content type. I'll show you what that looks like as far as the configuration is, but basically what I did on the blog content type, when I added the image field, rather than using an image type field, I used a media reference field of type image. And I set its format to render the full entity of the image. So when we get this image value from Drupal, we're getting the entire image entity. And this here is just simply making sure that the field is not empty, right? By doing render and trim, you're getting rid of any white space. There may be times when sometimes Drupal may give you a false positive, where maybe a white space could be considered content in Drupal, right? But so by doing something like this, you're completely wiping out any possibility that there's nothing but data there, right? And if that's the case, then you're printing the field. The date from the component is mapped to the date on this template. It's gotta be here somewhere. There's a date template here somewhere. There is, right? And the body text, we just, again, to the body field on the content type. And the tags, just like we did with the image, for the tags, we're printing the entire entity. This is the field tags of image, tags, I'm sorry. And for the modifier, in this case, we don't need to pass any classes to this here. However, let's say we are integrating the card that we want to display horizontally. Then here's what we would do card wide. And remember how we have the logic saying that if this class exists on our card, then the layout of that card will change to be horizontally rather than vertically. So that's how that can be done here. Right now, we don't need to do that. The one thing I need to close here is the embed statement and embed. And now that we have that there, I'm going to, let's comment this for now. I don't need it really. Yeah, I don't need that. So I'm gonna, oops. I'm going to get rid of that. So that is getting a lot nicer there. I'm going to bring in those blocks that we created before. And I know that we didn't use all of those, but I'm gonna show you how we are using the date. Remember how the date on the cards show up differently in different places? So here's where you can make use of the blocks, twig blocks. So the future card is the date that shows up in the corner of the card. Let me see, where is that at? Here, I call this future date because it's right there for the future content. This is called future content card. And so I show the date there, and for the regular card, the date is here. So because remember we had two blocks for date. So I'm bringing in the future date, although I don't want that date here. But what I'm doing to not get that date is I'm leaving this blank, this block blank. Right? There's nothing in it. That means Drupal is gonna see that and say, oh, future date. Oh, but you don't want anything there, so I'm not gonna put anything there. But instead, I have this other date block for the regular date. And because I'm passing the date variable, right, that we have up here and up there, then the date is gonna be printed here. And based on this name, we know where this name appears on our card, right? It appears right below the title. And then we have the tags. For the tags, we're just passing this here. We could also do something like this, right? And that will give us the same thing. But I like to kind of map things first so that we can kind of see how each of the things belongs or goes with Drupal, right? So this is all the component related stuff, and this is all Drupal related stuff here on the right. And so that's what that is. So let's see. Let's take a look and see how this looks in Drupal, right? Technically, we have integrated the component. The one thing to keep in mind here, Perry, I know he's done quite a bit of talks about different ways for integrating components in Drupal, and there are several ways. There is, you know, UI. There is obviously this way. There is the name is
UI patterns.
UI patterns. Thank you. I appreciate it.
No
UI patterns is one of them. There is a new one called Pattern Kit. And a few other options. And I've watched his talk like 2 or 3 times at least, because you know it's a great way to see how many things are available there. This particular method for integrating component is called what typically known as the presenter template, right? Where you create a template suggestion and you're manually mapping the fields as we did here. I like this approach personally. I have used UI patterns on a project and I liked it a lot as well. But I like this approach because it gives you a lot of control. You can do a lot of things yourself, right, as you're mapping this. And so this is just one way. The beauty of this approach that I like a lot is notice that there is 0 markup here. There's 0 HTML on this template. All it is basically either variables or this embed statement there with the fields being mapped. And that is key because you want all the markup and styles and JavaScript, all to come from pattern, right? From your component. So that when things need to change, you go into one place and change it there, and Drupal automatically knows about those changes. So single source of truth is key. That's kind of the one thing I want to mention there. So I'm going to clear my cache one more time now that we've integrated the component. And let me see. In just a second. Okay, great. So now I'm going to reload the page, and let's hope that nothing broke. Cool. Now you can see things are looking different, right? And what that tells me is that our card is now taking effect, right? But there's still a few things that are not quite right, and that's because we still need to do a couple of things. But let's take a look at what's happening here. Notice how I'm going to scroll to the top. How far can I go? Okay, here. Here is that one article, right? This is one of the cards. And notice how we have our card class. And here are all of our attributes that we had before, right? We didn't lose those. So that's very important to keep there. In addition, you see this data quick edit attributes there. What that means is that I still have access to all my quick links, right? My contextual links that I am still able to edit things in line, even though I'm using my own component, right? So this is not only good for obviously being able to edit content, but there's a lot of things that Drupal may be looking at this here for caching purposes, right? And things like that. So, but if we were to eliminate, I know there's a way, I just haven't figured out, to eliminate all these comments, you can see that our markup is nice and clean. We have our card media, that's for the image. And then we have the rest of the content of the card here. And now everything is exactly as we did it for our component, right? Here's our heading class and the card title that we passed when we integrated it. Here's our link, right? And it's got a heading link class. So things are, they make sense. There's a lot of contextual information there, which is very important to keep, right? Because if I go here, see how I can edit the tags if I want to, it's all there. This is the title, which it will be like right here. But so is looking great. And we have all the information we need as far as, attributes, title prefix, title suffix, but there's a couple of things we need to do with the date. Any questions on this before I jump into those last two things that we need to do? What I wanted to show, so we had two types of dates, right, for the two different cards. There's several ways you can do that. You can just write, in Twig, the different formats. What I did in this particular case is, where is that at? I created two different date formats, I think. There we go. I actually modified the long and the short date formats to use the formats that I wanted for each of the cards. So one way for me to make use of those is to set the, let's see, a variable that I can use for the date. Let me find it here. Where was it? Okay, here we go. Date. I don't know all this stuff offhand, by the way. Again, as I said before, there's several ways you can, create different formats for dates, right? You can do it all in Twig. So what I did is I created those two custom formats or updated the formats, and I set a variable for date using the same variable that already exists, and passed, what date is that I want to do, and change the format to long, which is one of the two formats that I modified on the UI, right? So I don't know if I need to clear my cache, but let's not do that right now and see if it works. Okay, so there you go. So it works. You can see that now the date is cleaner. For the tags, this was a little more complicated to do, by the way, if you can believe that, and they seem so simple, but they gave me a hard time. So the first thing I did is I want to see how is Drupal printing these tags for me. And I noticed that there's several templates that Drupal uses to print tags. So I went and looked at, first is using a taxonomy term. This is for the vocabulary itself, right? So it's taxonomy term, and here is, it says tags. So I can create that myself, but there's also another one. There is this one here, this field blog tags. This is the actual field for the tags. So when I added the blog here, if I go to manage fields, so we have the author, the body, the images, and the tags. So this is an entity reference. And notice how it is field blog tags. That's the name of the field, right? For the display, on the teaser view mode, since that's the view mode we're working with, notice how for the image, I have render entity, and I can assign a image style here or responsive image style if I need to. For the tags, I'm doing the same thing. I'm saying, give me the entire entity, the full collection of everything that the tags offer. And in addition to that, I created a view mode for the taxonomy vocabulary called blog. So I'm able to choose it from here. Like if I wanted to do something specific with this kind of tags, I can use a view mode to give me something different than regular tags, right? So that's what I'm doing there. I'm using view modes for images, for nodes, obviously. They're great. If I use them on views, you can also make use of those. So let's go ahead and let's figure out this tags thing. So I need to create two template suggestions. One is this one that is coming from the taxonomy term. And again, I have copies of this locally on my theme, but typically they will be copied from your base theme. In my case, it will be stable. So I have this already in my theme, and I also have a field template already in my theme, but I need to create, let me see which one makes the most sense. I think it's this one here. It's a little more specific because I don't want to modify all the tags on the entire site. I want to just modify the ones that I'm using on this particular content type. So, so let me do that real quick. And what I'm going to do just to make things easier for everybody is just two field tags. Going to web. Just bear with me for a second there. Training template field. Now there's two, and I believe there is, oh, the taxonomy one. Okay. All right, so now we have actually, or three tags that I needed to three templates. So here we go. So what I did is I first for the node, here is one of the templates. Now this one, actually let's take a look at this one first. I'm getting confused here. Maybe I did the wrong one. Okay, here's the individual one. So here's the single tag. This is why when I build the component, I build the single tag individually on its own first, because it will make the integration process a lot easier for me. Because I noticed that Drupal first gives you a template for the individual tag, a single item. And so I'm here including just the single tag item, right? Notice how it is underscore tag. And although we named it with the underscore so that PatternLab can ignore that from the navigation, Drupal can still make use of this template, even though it's got an underscore. So, and notice that when we build the component for tags, there are two variables that Drupal uses, and that's how I build a component. One is the URL and one is the name. And so since the component was built with those two variables only, I don't need to pass any parameters here to say which field goes with which field. It automatically knows. It will automatically look for those two variables from this component. Drupal will automatically look for those two variables, as by default, and it will find them because that's the only two variables that I have on my component. The other thing, this is for, let me see, I'm getting confused as to which. Okay, so here, this is the one that has the collection of tags. And so again, I'm using an embed. The reason is because if you remember on our card, for the tags, we put the tags inside this twig block of tags, right? So, right, tag item, where was it? Tag item, now I'm really confused. Tag item, tags. All right, let me see. I'm really getting confused now. So let's see. I did the date. Tag item. So I did the taxonomy term tags. We have that. We did the field node, field blog, tags blog. So this is for the field of the tags, this one here. Okay. And I think that's pretty much all I did. Maybe I have the duplicate copy. That's why I'm getting confused now. Or let me kind of get rid of this one for now. See if I don't mess it up. Okay, let me clear my cache now so that we have the, so the beauty of doing twig blocks, as an example here, the default way that some of these templates print content are like this. For example, they have only the content render array, right? So because we've done a lot of the markup on our component, and here we're simply passing the component, we don't want to be reformatting this render array. We're using twig blocks to say, you know what? I have this component here, grab it, and just print the variable content array here, and you will find that all that this needs is in my component. So just print that. Whatever you want, just print it here. So we're not trying to fight with Drupal and trying to, granularly trying to break that content array in pieces. We're just saying, just give me that and use this component to map things accordingly. And we're doing that there, and we're doing that here. Actually, this is one that is. So let me clear my cache, see if I didn't break anything. I wonder one of those templates is from something else that I was doing, maybe. Let's see. Once that clears. All right, let me see how this looks. If I get an error, I know that. All right, cool. Okay, so those were the right templates. All right, so you notice how my tags now look nicely styled, and because I'm logged in, and I can literally edit each of the tags if I need to right there, because we are passing attributes all the way from my component. I'm not gonna touch on the image style. I need to fix that. Obviously, that's not the right size, right? And on our training, we build the full section, right? I style it nicely, but here there's more to be done there. There's another component for the full section, and then integrate that with the main wrapper of the section. So I'm not going to do that. I just don't have enough time. But this is pretty much what I wanted to do, is show you how we start all the way from Pattern Lab, right? We have our card component, right? And we're able to integrate it with Drupal. So that now Drupal is making use of our card component, but passing all of Drupal data. And so that presenter template approach that I was talking about is basically, its only purpose is just to pass Drupal data from the component, from Drupal to the component, so that Drupal can render that data using our component that we build in Pattern Lab. Not sure how time is. How much more time do we have there, Imogen, or are we good there?
Well, it's 7:20.
And what time was I supposed to be done at?
I told you anytime you wanted, before 7:30. Right. So.
Okay, good. So, I mean, this is pretty much all I had. There is a lot. And again, think about it. This is just one component. This is one card component, right? But now we have it integrated. And so that means that every time you build a node, you create a new node, it will automatically be styled like this if you're using the teaser view mode. Obviously, there's more work to be done, you know, style the sections, but that's a completely separate thing. And so this is just a quick example of how thinking ahead in Drupal terms when you're building your components can really provide you a lot of advantages, right? One in particular will be attributes, you know, caching, your contextual links, right? If you notice, if I was to remove this here, which I remember doing this at the beginning when I started learning about, you know, components and Drupal, never made attributes or title prefix or title suffix available in my components. And so what would happen is, let me see when that clears. So what would happen is I will end up with visually, you know, and sometimes this may just work, right? It's not necessarily something that you must do, but I think it's a good practice. But now so the site looks the same, right? But now, well, maybe I have other things that are coming in from attributes there. Oh, the image, the entity, okay. But I think not everything, what happened? I tried this with another project to show this very same example that when you remove those things, they must be coming from, I'm not sure, that those contextual links and attributes go away. In fact, I do have a video tutorial that where I show exactly that. And so, sure, maybe Cash didn't quite clear, I'm not sure. But anyway, so just a good practice to make sure that these things are available in your components so that you don't run into issues with Drupal later on when things are not being cached or your caching tags don't bubble up to the top of the page and that kind of thing. So that's all I have. Any questions? I know there's a lot, but sorry about that.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
This is Jen. And when you are creating the the namespace, so the theme that pulls the URL or the file path, how do you set that up?
Sure, good question. And I meant to cover that when I was talking about it and I completely forgot. So the way you do that, you do in your info file, in your themes info file, you set up, you need to make sure that you have your components module turned on. And it says, we have it right here. So you do component libraries, right? So this is the component module libraries, component libraries module. So you set that up, and then this is where you determine the namespace. You can literally call it anything you want. We typically use the same name as the theme. And then for paths, you tell it, because if you know that Drupal by default will look for twig templates only inside your templates directory, right? So that's why we always need to save our twig template suggestions inside our templates directory in our theme. And so by doing this, you are creating a namespace that you can use. And by path, you can say, you know what, in addition to looking for templates inside the templates directory, I also want you to look for templates in all these other directories. And so that's how, by using this namespace, this is in a way already mapped to these directories so that you can, on your component, then you can say, you know, like what we did here, you can say training, because already mapped to the components directory, right? Right here. You can just say, okay, I want in the components directory, I want the tags.twig file. So that's how the namespace is declared there. And in PatternLab, if you look at PatternLab, they have something similar, but what they do is they have a namespace for each type of entity in a way, like atoms, molecules, organisms, right? So in their case, each of those will be something like that exactly, which makes it kind of easier. It'll be atoms, and then they specify the path, and then they do molecules, so that when you're using that in your component, you will do, you say, I want to include an atom. So you will do atoms, you know, and then your component name or your pattern name.
Awesome, that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Sure. anything else? Is Chaz or Perry still around to, was there anything there that perhaps you think could be done differently, or you want to elaborate on anything else, or something that I covered that could make more sense to some?
No, I think you did a great job. We're there with the component library. So John Albin, that came out of, I can't remember if it was DrupalCon.
Right.
New Orleans for DrupalCon Austin. Me and Adam
John Albin.
Yeah, we're giving
New Orleans, I think.
Yeah, me and Adam Durant were giving a presentation on this concept, but we were doing gulp tasks for copying stuff, and John came up to the microphone and said, "Why are you copying it?" And 3 weeks later, came out with a great module. So thank you, John.
Yeah, no, that's a great module. Yeah, which is sometimes, at the beginning, I used to kind of create issues for me because I would be creating components, try to make them work on Pattern Lab or Drupal, and I would get this white screen of death. Drupal saying, "Oh, this doesn't exist," and I say, "What are you talking about?" And I have forgotten to turn on to enable the components module. So something to keep in mind. I'm sure it's happened to all of us at some point.
I agree. It was great. I even I learned a few little tricks. It's always great to see somebody else's approach.
Oh, I appreciate that. Appreciate that, Brian. Coming from you means a lot. I'm not kidding when I said that I watched your talk 2 or 3 times. I've done it at least twice at Bad Camp, and I watched it recorded also because, and I would suggest everybody to watch that because there's many ways in which this can be done. The UI patterns component that we were talking about earlier is a way that allows you to do what we just did, but through the Drupal UI, right? Almost like when you work with Display Suite or Layout Builder in a way. So it's not as code heavy as this is. But again, the reason I like this particular approach is because it just gives me a little more reassurance that, here's what I want, and I'm calling the shots in a way here in my template. So that's the reason. So any other questions? Yeah.
Can you declare a module dependency in a theme now in 9? Does that work yet?
You can, but it from my experience, it doesn't work the way at least I expected it to. You can declare the dependency, but it won't force the dependency to be installed. So it provides some protection, but I feel like it's not all the way there yet.
So will it at least prevent the theme from being enabled then, so you don't get that white screen of death? Is that?
Yep.
Is that all it does?
Which is certainly nice.
Better than nothing, I guess.
Yep.
So who's done anything with Drupal 9 yet from a, I guess, theming or component point of view? Have you Shaz or Brian?
I have a new theme that's going to come out called Ohana, which is a Drupal 8/9 Pattern Lab infused theme with browser sync, which is kind of a best of breeds of theme generator, Gesso, which I worked on quite a bit, material, and web design system. So I thank you to you and Adam Duran's.
Yeah, for sure. This morning,
package JSON file to force Pattern Lab to use Twig 2. So
right. So Pattern Lab uses right now, like in Drupal 8, Pattern Lab uses the Twig renderer 1.4, I think, which is Twig 1 basically, and Drupal 9 uses Twig 2.0. And so there's a way to upgrade your Pattern Lab Twig renderer engine to use Twig 2.0 so that it is in sync with Drupal's Twig PHP. I did a presentation this morning at Drupal Atlanta, and I did the whole thing, as I said before, and it looked like the whole thing was down the entire time. So I was just pretty much talking to myself. But then after that, we had a sponsored break for Mediacurrent, and I did a short version of that, and I think that may be available at some point. So if you want to catch that, but it's really straightforward, and there's this blog post that Adam wrote. It makes it very easy to do. It's just a couple of steps on a package.json here that you do, and just run npm install, and that does it for you. So the one thing I have not been able to do, and I don't know if Chaz or Brian or anybody else, is that although I do see that I've upgraded Twig renderer to Twig 2.0, I have not been able to find any Twig code that I can write to actually test whether it's working or not, because a lot of the things that have been deprecated in Twig 1.0 are not things that I would typically do, right? Or write code that way on Twig, or it's just things that are more in the back end, more than theming. So I'm not sure if anyone out there has actually said, this code should only work on 2 and above and not 1. I don't know if anybody has run into any of that.
I can't remember off the top of my head, but I did run into something randomly with the Olivero theme. I'll try to dig it up, and I'll follow up on
Okay.
Slack.
Because one of the things is that but that's raw. I know, but it's not the raw filter though. That's why a lot of people think it's not the raw filter. If you look at the documentation, it says the raw tag, and I tried it. I worked on. I looked at a team. I added the pipe raw on a couple of variables. No issues at all with Twig 2.0, and so. So I think the raw tag may be referring to something else, not necessarily the filter itself. Because I'm looking at the deprecation list, and a lot of those things are just things that I have never really had the need to do with Twig. It's more about, maybe something you would do with, if you're working directly with Symfony maybe, or that kind of thing, but not from a Drupal theming point of view. But anyway. I know we're out of time, so thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate you sticking around, and I hope this was helpful. And it was recorded, right, Amy June? So hopefully others can find it useful. I appreciate the opportunity, Amy June, for this. And yeah, I love coming back to this, especially now that more people are getting into it. We're seeing some really great presentations and topics. So looking